So I connect to the feeling. I'm like, I feel bad. Like, what's going on? Did I do something wrong? Why is it that he's not responding? He always responds. He always tells me what's going on. This time he's not. And if he's not, that must mean I did something. And if I did something, that must mean I'm bad. And if I'm bad, that means something's wrong with me. And if something's wrong with me, I'm being rejected. That means I'm unworthy.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. And I'm really excited to have my very special guest, Caurel Richards. I just want to tell you a little bit about our guest today. I'm going to read the bio here. So Caurel Richards is a dynamic and creative individual with a wealth of knowledge and experience, having worked in multiple service industries in the last 14 years. One of the biggest lessons that Caurel learned in those years was the importance of mental health and how unhealed trauma can keep you stuck and away from the life that you've dreamed of. In 2021, after completing her training with Marissa Peer to become a hypnotherapist and rapid transformational therapy practitioner, she founded the company In Divine Time Transformational Services. Her mission is to help people with complex childhood trauma break down barriers, release healthy habits and patterns to discover freedom and peace of mind. Her goal is to get you excited about your life again, and by empowering you with a fresh perspective. Caurel is coming to us from Winnipeg. So welcome. How are you?
I am excited, first of all, to be here. Any chance that I get to share my story or just share my experiences, I'm always excited for that. So let's get into it.
I'm so excited. And for people that are just tuning in, I also am a rapid transformational therapy practitioner. But what was really funny to me was that I actually went out onto a podcast forum looking for guests. And just very coincidentally, Caurel happens to also be an RTT practitioner. So that's always super special for me because it takes a very special person to do this kind of work. So Caurel, I know a little bit about your background.
Yeah.
I shared it in the teaser. A moment for you that kind of shifted everything in your life was you were 2 years old in a Jamaican airport, watching your father leave for a new life in America.
Yeah.
How did that affect you?
You don't recognize it in the moment when it's happening, how it's affecting you. It's just doing those introspective, journeys. You recognize, okay, the way that I interpreted that situation may not have been the truth, but I have to own what it did for me in that moment. Now, I say it that way because I think a lot of us, we're so quick to put an excuse in place of why the other person wasn't, at fault. And it's not really about blame or anything. It's really just having an account of your experience, right? Because we're both having, if it's two people in a situation or an experience, we're both experiencing it differently, right? So having an account of my experience, I was able to see that when he was leaving, even though I knew the other side, and I'm going to tell you my story first, and I can outline you the additional information that would put everything together and make sense of the story. So for me, when I saw him at the airport, this is somebody that I love, adore. He's my road dog, as we would say in Jamaica. Everywhere he was, I was. So now in a situation where his back is turned to me. And I say his back is turned to me because I don't even recognize how impactful that was at the time. Because even to this day, when someone turns their back to me, in a sense, triggers me.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Just having their back turned to me or just walking away, it's a missile to me. And it brings me back to that moment when there he is at the airport. One, he's not responding to me. Two, nobody's explaining to me what's happening, that he's going to the States to make a better life for me. In that moment, I interpret that as one, I feel, first of all, I feel icky. So I connect to the feeling. I'm like, I feel bad. Like, what's going on? Did I do something wrong? Why is it that he's not responding? He always responds. He always tells me what's going on. This time he's not. And if he's not, that must mean I did something. And if I did something, that must mean I'm bad. And if I'm bad, that means something's wrong with me. And if something's wrong with me, I'm being rejected. That means I'm unworthy. Do you see the story that we tell ourselves?
I'm glad you're explaining it this way, because I specialize in trauma, right? I'm a certified trauma recovery coach. And I always am so very mindful when I use the word trauma because we've also been taught up to this point that trauma is aggressive. Trauma is a violation. It's an abuse. It's an attack, right? Or it's an acute trauma, like you're in a war situation.
Yeah.
And that's really what we've always believed. But there's another type of trauma. And Gabor Mate talks about the big T and the little t. I get what he's saying, but at the end of the day, trauma is trauma and it's processed in the body all the same.
Exactly.
Right? But what he calls little t trauma is exactly what you just described. It is this deep sense of not being seen, not being heard, not being valuable, not being important, feeling insignificant.
Yeah.
Which makes us worry about ourselves, our safety, our worthiness.
Yeah.
When that gets embodied, it also feels like trauma to the system because regardless of the attack or that experience, your brain registers as a threat.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not safe. I'm being rejected. I'm being abandoned. Like you said, whether that's the truth or not, it's the perception. And I have a sign behind me that says, trauma is not the event. Trauma is the way that it is experienced in the body over and over and over again. So I'm so glad that you're using this experience because it's so important for people to understand that are stuck and don't understand why they're stuck in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. That experiences like this can hinder us.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
If people are willing to dig deep, they're going to still play in the front seat of the car. So tell me, here's the question I have that's interesting. So you have this experience, it leaves you feeling not enough, right? If
Basically.
I were enough, he would have turned around. If I was worthy enough, he would have explained, he would have given me a hug, a kiss goodbye. Someone would be telling me what's going on.
Right.
As a child in Jamaica, adolescent, teenager, how did you show up in the world?
Boy. Before I even get into how I showed up into the world, I'll explain. In fact, maybe I'll leave it. It'll probably come back. How I showed up in Jamaica was, one, I was angry. Right. If any of my friends, anybody I've probably been associated with before, they probably don't know this version of me because I was the angry person. I was just quick to snap. I always had a response. I knew everything. I was entitled. I wasn't willing to hear what anyone else had to say. And beneath all of that was hurt, was pain, was just a constant reinforcement of those beliefs that had already been created. The seed had already been sown. I'm already thinking that I'm not enough as a child. So until someone tells me otherwise, that's the belief.
And is anyone at home combating that belief, or is that further validated now that you're living with just your mom?
It's reinforced because, one, she's doing the best that she can, and we know this, and she also has her own stuff, right? And she's living from her own stuff. And it's so funny you asked that question because I went as far back as my maternal and paternal grandparents, and I'm seeing the experiences that they had, the dynamic they had, and I'm recognizing that my parents, the only thing they did was to recreate that. 100%. My grandfather on both maternal and paternal, they were very grandiose, and we know beneath grandiosity is shame, 100%. Is guilt, and nobody likes the feeling of shame and guilt. Nobody. So we're going to hide, and we're going to hide behind this pompous nature. And they showed up in the world that way, and they gravitated, or women like my grandmother or grandmothers gravitated to men like that because, one, they're people pleasers. They're trying to fix this man.
I love you. You're describing all the work I do in one episode. Keep going.
So, they created that dynamic for my mother and my father. My mother ended up finding my father through the strangest instance. And just to maintain privacy for them, it was that dynamic. where my mother really, really just needed someone to see her. And my
100%.
father did that. He protected her with a small event. He protected her. And that small dose that she got allowed her to attach.
So I just want to stop you here because you just unpacked so much. So there's a couple of things I want to address that you brought up. Number one, look, narcissism is used very loosely these days.
It is.
Okay. And if you study narcissism, which I have, and if you study trauma, which I have, there is true narcissism in the world, and it's getting really just thrown around in everyone's situation. But when you talk about grandiosity, right? Regardless of the person's narcissistic or not, really narcissism is a spectrum of coping strategy.
Absolutely.
Okay. And it becomes very malignant when it becomes very damaging to the other person, right?
Yeah.
Psychologically, emotionally, verbally. But what you talked about is so true. Whether it's narcissism or not, that grandiose behavior, someone that's showing up with this seemingly huge sense of self as being very positive, is actually a very, very, very sad, self-loathing filled person. And people get confused by that. When they see somebody that has a very grandiose nature, they think they are so full of themselves. They have this very high confidence that it's actually the exact opposite. Absolutely. And that grandiosity is simply a mask. Right? Now, you also hit on the fact that, and the studies show in narcissism, that narcissists are attracted to people pleasers, right? Or what we'll call empaths, the exact opposite end of this spectrum. And both somebody that's very empathic and somebody that is very narcissistic in nature are both very codependent. It all comes back to attachment style.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So there's 4 main attachment styles. This is just a little education note. People that want to understand attachment. I love going to Mark Manson's website. It's really, really brilliant. He's the guy that wrote Go and Fuck Yourself. He has great information out there about attachment style, but attachment style, the grandfather of attachment style is John Bowlby. And there are 4 different attachment styles. When you are raised in an environment where your needs are not met in a secure fashion, and it's almost a manipulated thing. I'm going to give you a little bit, but then I'm going to take it away, right? Think of a parent. I'm going to give you a little bit, but then I'm going to actually punish you by taking some attention away so you'll behave and get in line.
Yeah, it's not intentional. I want to add that part. It's not intentional.
But you brought it up. It's learned.
Yeah.
This is why I titled, this particular episode about intergenerational trauma. Because what you said, when you go back to your grandparents and their parents, often I'll do something called a genogram with people that is this 3-level family tree that shows the attachment styles, the relationship styles in the family, so people can start to see it didn't start with you.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And that's where I say, in terms of blame, it's not blame. When you go to your parent, take for instance, if I was to ever go to my mother and I express to her, well, this is what I experienced. We're not telling you that to make it seem like you're a bad parent. We're just giving you an account of what we have experienced. And we're just asking you to hold space for us to, even if it doesn't feel real to you, you didn't experience it that way. It's just sitting in that and allowing us to be heard, to be seen, and to be understood. I know shame and guilt comes up because you're like, well, this was my experience too. And I promised myself I would never do that to my child. You don't even realize that you were conditioned to do the very same thing.
And this is why I really say this so strongly all the time. Your generation, my generation, we are a generation of cycle breakers. I think we have access to the most information up to this point from the other generations on how this is showing up in our lives. We're also a generation where there's more of a campaign against the stigma of mental health. More people than ever are doing the work.
Yeah.
And so I feel like we're in this ginormous generation of cycle breakers. So
Absolutely.
you have this experience where your mother is doing her best, right? Based on what she knows, based on what she experienced, based on what she's seen culturally, familially, whatever it is, she's doing her absolute best.
Yeah.
You're walking with all this anger.
Yeah.
You are that sister that everybody's like, I need this ride or die because she will fight my fight for me 24/7. Right.
Yeah.
And how is that serving you at that point in your life?
It's not. It's serving me professionally because I was a hard ass. I could get stuff done, but internally I was a mess. At some point I thought I had bipolar disorder because I'm like, 1 minute I'm just up, the next minute I'm down, and it was just me having functional depression. Because yes, I was functioning, but I was depressed as hell. Like, the person that I am at my core couldn't show up because, one, if she shows up, it's gonna come out explosive, and that's what happens most of the times. It was very explosive. So me expressing myself, even if it's kindness, the way that it comes across to the other person and how they perceive it may not be kindness. It's just me telling them the truth, but the truth hurts. So I was afraid to have a voice most times because, one, when I did speak, somebody ended up hurt, or two, they just couldn't receive it the way that I expected them to receive it.
Now, why were they hurt? Just because of the way it was being expressed?
It could be that, and I want to hold space for that because it is possible the way that I was delivering it may have been a trigger for them. Because remember, truth will hit on a wound whether you want it to or not, right? And it's me being mindful of, okay, is this the right time to be telling this person this? Or should I just be mindful and probably express it to them in a safer space? I wasn't emotionally intelligent because I didn't even know that emotions existed. What was emotion? I just know I felt angry or sad, and that was it. The range of emotion just wasn't, frustration. I feel discouraged. I feel resentful. Those words weren't even a thing to me.
It's interesting because often, and I'm curious, when you're working with a client and you say to them, how do you feel? Do they often just say, I feel bad?
Yeah.
And they don't know how to put the words to it. And I end up putting up on the screen, because I do a lot of work on Zoom, like the feeling wheel. I actually have it right behind me as well in my office. Brene Brown's book, The Atlas of the Heart, is a brilliant book because all it does is find the language for something you don't know how to express that you are feeling.
Yeah.
Right. And so I like doing this, and I'm curious if you do this, help people put actual true language to this term bad.
Yeah. I've introduced not even saying I feel bad, because that already is denoting a feeling of shame, right? I'm like, okay, well, when you say you feel bad, describe to me what that feels. Tell me how that feels in your body. What are some of the things, the stories that you're telling yourself? Because it's the narrative that you're telling yourself. You already know this. It starts with a thought. If I'm feeling icky, I'm like, okay, what am I saying to myself at this point that is making me feel icky? So it's okay if you feel bad. I'll make suggestions. Okay, when you say you feel bad, are you feeling frustrated? And I'll give them those words, and they'll be like, frustrated feels true. Because it's really intuitive, really. So it's just to give those words sometimes, and they'll pick which one actually resonates with them.
So here's a question for you. So I also use this very, global coaching model. You have a circumstance, you have your thought, your feeling, your action, your outcome. But I always say to my clients, there's a missing layer there. And to me, it's right between the circumstance and the thought, and it's invisible.
Okay.
I call it the myelin sheath. It's like this really thin, invisible layer.
Yeah.
And that's the core belief.
Yeah.
Because if you're in the same circumstance, say you're standing on the streets of Winnipeg, and somebody, say you're with someone, and someone else you happen to be acquaintance to walks by and maybe doesn't pay attention and doesn't say hello to you.
Yeah.
You might walk away and being like, that person's a bitch. Like, what is wrong with them? Why didn't they say so? They're so rude. The other person is experiencing the same thing. she probably was just like looking at her phone, or maybe there's something going on with her. Maybe she's really sad and she doesn't even feel like she can say hello. Maybe she's not okay. But it's the core experience, the core belief that we have.
Yeah.
The core belief of that person's a bitch because they rejected me or they ignored me.
Yeah.
Comes from a belief that rejection is very available to me. I'm always been abandoned. I'm not eligible for deep, meaningful connections. There's something wrong with me. And here's another example. That person just walked right past me.
That's absolutely true. And I think what I want to also add to that too, it's like you said, it's an automatic response.
Oh yeah,
right?
It's fast. It's like a whisper, boom, boom, done.
Yeah. And I think also as children, we are basically in this world, I would say from 0 to 7, we're connected to feelings, right? And we're very much egocentric. Everything is about us. Everything is personalized. With trauma, that actually stops that development of moving away from things being personal to the logic of it being, oh, well, they're just living their life. You know, a lot of people don't get past that stage of taking things personal. Everything is personal in their day-to-day. Everything.
100%.
And it's 100%. Tough living that way because the other person, how they're living their life, most of the times has nothing to do with you. And I know we're connected as human beings and we can't just live in this world thinking that we're just individuals. There is some collective nature somewhere in the mix, but it doesn't mean that everything that somebody does means something about you.
It rarely does.
Yeah.
I love the book, The 4 Agreements. Have you read it?
Love it.
Okay. So Don Miguel Ruiz, for those who are not familiar, I'm always dropping these different resources. So if you have a good idea for something to share, but Don Miguel Ruiz wrote this really great book, probably about 30 years ago, called The 4 Agreements. And basically the premise is you've made all these different agreements, core beliefs in your life. You need to let go of them and just adopt these 4, which is be impeccable with your word. Don't make assumptions. Don't take things personally because it's not about you, and to do your best. Yeah. And that don't make assumptions, right? The assumptions come from the core belief. Oh, that person must be mad at me because ... You'll come up with a cognitive reason, but the deep rooted reason is because I'm not enough.
Yeah.
And
most
then
of the times it goes back to that.
Yeah. And then don't take it personally. We're always personalizing. And you're right that the ego is at play. And this is why your story about being 2 years old in the airport is so pertinent. Because people, there's this assumption of like, oh my God, well, they were so young. Like, what do they even remember?
You'd be surprised.
It's rooted as a feeling.
Yes.
Deep in the fiber of your being.
Yeah.
And it never leaves. And it shows up when you are a 16-year-old person that's literally looking for the fight.
Yeah.
Right? And you're like, I have this emotion. I don't know what to do with it. So just scratch the surface, will ya? Yeah. So I can just let it out just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel compelled to tell even parents that have these 2-year-olds that are having these temper tantrums, as you guys call it, that they don't have words at that point. And I'm not speaking from someone that has never experienced. Even recently, I had a 2-year-old that I went to the park with, and he just wasn't ready to leave. And he was making it clear that he was not ready to leave. And I mean, I could have felt embarrassed. I could have felt shame. But I sat there and I was just like, you just honestly don't want to leave. And I get that. And that was his way of communicating. He was screaming on the top of and he was getting angry and he was hitting. And it's not to say I'm condoning the behavior. I'm just saying I understand that this is his way of communicating his frustration because I'm not understanding him. And if I'm not understanding him, he feels misunderstood. And that feeling isn't a good feeling.
I'm so glad you've brought it up because I learned a lot getting trained by Marissa.
Likewise.
It really makes you stop. You're dedicating this very dedicated time to learning.
Yeah.
So you might as well listen. Mm-hmm. Right? And she talks so much about child development. But what I recognized is I approach every young child very differently. Yeah. And I always think to myself, my kids are 13 and almost 18. God, I would have done things so differently if I had had the knowledge that I gained from training with her.
Yeah.
But you're so right. We're not stopping and asking ourselves, why are they doing this? We're only focused on what they're doing.
Yeah. And how it's making us feel.
And how it's making us feel and what we need to do and how they're hindering it.
Yeah. So
that what is throwing a tantrum, having, acting out, maybe it's preventing you from getting somewhere, right? Like think of a mom that's trying to get her kid into the car and she needs to get to Target to get the prescription before she has to pick the next one up from school. And she has to have that prescription and it's a time crunch. And the infant she's trying to get into the car, the toddler, is just like, he's fucking tired. He doesn't want to go anywhere. Maybe he's hungry. Maybe he just wants to be at home, but he has something to express. And it's showing up and stiffening his body, and you're shoving him into the car seat, and he's and you're frustrated, and everyone's sweating, and you're causing so much friction.
Yeah.
Because we're not listening.
We're not listening.
Nobody cries and has a tantrum like that just because.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you're just trying to get attention. No, it has nothing.
Or maybe it is that they're trying to get attention, but they don't know how to express what it is that they need. And maybe what they need is to be seen, heard, hugged, controlled, soothed. So when you're trying to get that attention, it doesn't have to be a negative thing.
It doesn't.
What ends up being is if the need's not met, then they learn the only time my need is met is when I really act out.
Oh, yeah.
Now, it doesn't even have to be positive attention. It's just attention.
Yeah. Wow. That brought me back. That brought me back. It's so funny. I was talking about an experience of another kid, and it brought me back to me. I remember, and I vividly remember this. I remember wanting something, and I was in the middle of the street, and they wouldn't give it to me. I remember not getting what I wanted, and I just sat in the middle of the street.
In Jamaica?
Yeah, in Jamaica. Yeah. I remember, this is probably 3 or 4. I just sat in the middle of the street. I'm like, I'm not moving until you give me what I want. And they just walked away. They just walked away, because the culture is basically rooted in, this child is not going to tell me how to live my life.
Yeah,
this child is basically, you're the kid, I'm the adult. What I say goes. So at that point, it's like, whoever I was at that point, whoever I came into this world as, I have just been conditioned to be like, okay, well, what you want isn't important. What they say goes. So you need to get your ass up and start walking. And that was just one instance.
Right. And so how does this show up in different people? It can show up as obstinance, defiance, right? Mm-hmm. Let me just now be more difficult, because then maybe my need will get met.
Yeah.
Or extreme people pleasing.
Absolutely.
Right? Oh my God, well, that didn't work. So let me just fawn and do whatever you ask me to do and get ahead of it. And then maybe I'll get my needs met.
Yeah.
Right? And I always say, I came up with this new saying recently, which is, when we're young, listen to this. This is a good one. I'm kind of proud of myself for this one. When we're young, we shapeshift. We shed a piece of ourselves to meet the needs of others so our needs will be met.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Right? So we start to abandon pieces of ourselves. We start to shed pieces of our true authentic self expression. I'm screaming at you because I'm 2 and I can't talk yet. I'm trying to tell you what I need. So now this could result in not using my voice.
Yep.
Right? People don't understand. It goes all the way back. And then they come to you, to me, to any coach, any therapist. It's like, I don't know. I'm just so shy. I don't want to use my voice. I'm so afraid to get up and speak my opinion. Yeah. People don't understand so much of this is rooted in a belief of my voice is not worthy of being heard because it wasn't heard. My need wasn't met.
Yeah. And it's also, I don't matter. So if I don't matter, then what's the point of saying anything? Yeah. I mean, I think you just repeating a part of my story. The only difference is that I went again from one extreme to the next. I was like, oh, I'm going to let you know my needs need to be met. And then it's
And
just
were
like
they still met?
not necessarily the way that I wanted it to be met, and then went along the lines of, okay, well, if you're not going to meet it this way, okay, let me start doing what you want me to do. And then maybe you'll consider my needs. And it never really happened that way.
Mm.
But you've already started to create a pattern. You've already started to create a habit. It takes 21 days to create a habit. And I would say being a people pleaser, I didn't stop becoming or being a people pleaser until I was 30 and I'm 35.
Yeah. So let's fast forward. People have gotten a good understanding of how these micro moments.
Yeah.
Right? It's one moment. Mm-hmm. It's not a situation in which you were abused every day, all the time. No abuse, to my knowledge, from what you've shared with me from your dad. But there's this moment where you feel, even if this was the case or not the case, abandoned and rejected.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't matter if it's the case or not. It's how you felt. So therefore it's real.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. I'm glad you asked it that way, because I think we need to separate perceived threat versus real threat,
Mm-hmm.
And perception is internal. Real is based on what's actually happening. And that perceived threat, we have control over that. Our thoughts determine how we will perceive life.
Right. But as a 2-year-old,
you have no clue. You don't have any.
You don't. So fast forward us a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
How did you go from that young girl and that feisty chick in the street to where you are now at 35? How did you do the work? Why did you do the work? What was it that got you to your knees that was like, I got to stop this?
Man, consistent heartbreak. And I say consistent heartbreak because I think the heartbreak started with me. Because once you start betraying yourself, you're going to attract people that are going to betray you. You're going to perceive it as betrayal.
Yep.
So I would always bring it back to me. And it's not to say that I'm harsh to myself. I'm just calling it what it is. If I had stayed true to myself, because nobody really modeled to me what staying true to myself was, because I was told every day that, no, being you're a little bit too loud. You're a little bit too opinionated. In this world, kids need to be seen and not heard. And you're not even really seen. They know you exist, but they're not attuned to who you are. So they create a version of you, or they push you, or they mold you into a version of you that is suitable for them, not recognizing that I'm a human being as well. And I was placed here. There is a greater purpose of me being here. And of course, you go through these things because then on the other side, your purpose shows up. But in that moment, the pain that is accumulating, that basket is filling up. And you get to a point where you're just like, I've had enough. Like, I'm tired of being resentful and angry. Like, it's so draining to be angry. It's so tiring. You have to always be looking behind you. You're just consistently paranoid to be like, okay, who is going to hurt me next? Is it you? Is it you? Is it you? And you don't get to live. You don't get to live a full life. And I'm like, the last thing I'm going to do is be here and not live a full life. So I had to point the finger towards me, because I was always pointing the finger towards the men that I was choosing. I no longer say I tracked. I'll say choose, because I'm the one that was really choosing them. I was like, the last instance, I was like, I've had enough. Okay, I'm the common denominator. What can I do differently? And I'm like, okay, well, what's going on with me? Am I even attuned to myself? I wasn't.
That's a brilliant question, by the way.
I wasn't.
I don't think people would understand what that means. So can you explain what that means?
Attunement?
Well, just being attuned to yourself.
It's checking in with yourself. It's that simple. It's when you wake up in the morning, what do I need today to flourish? What do I need today to thrive? And for a very long time, I was surviving. I only knew survival, right? And it's not that I needed to survive, because my parents provided what they needed for me to no longer survive. The one thing I can say is I got everything from them except that survival mode or not having opportunities. I had opportunities at my feet. So in having opportunity, and I say this because it gives you the chance to do more introspection. When you're surviving, the last thing you're thinking about is introspection. The last thing you're thinking about is, oh, how can I feel better? It's no, how can I pay these bills? And I've never had to think about, oh, how can I pay these bills? So I've had to just sit, feel the feelings that I was avoiding my entire life. Because once you open that up, the floodgates. I was
It's
crying
Pandora's box.
For days I'd be crying and I'm like, what the hell is going on? Because tears to me was not familiar. I didn't grow up seeing people cry. You know, you're like, oh, you're stronger than that. Get it together, you know?
So how were you, because I'm asking this because people that are listening, I don't think people know, you and I know this because we're doing the work, how many people we come across that are not in tune with their feelings because they were taught not to express them.
Yeah.
Right. And so in order to survive their family, they were like, okay, I'm taught not to express it. I can't express it if I feel it. Like I can't do that if I'm feeling it. So now I'm just going to cut myself off from the feeling.
Yep.
So if I don't feel it, I can't have to worry about not expressing it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so people call it disassociation, whatever it is, you're disconnecting from feeling.
Yeah.
Now, and just walking numb, empty.
Yeah.
No.
Basically.
Okay.
Basically.
So I know there's got to be somebody that's watching this that's going to relate to that.
Oh,
how did you do that work to start getting in attunement with your feelings, in touch with the feeling? How did you do that?
Well, once I couldn't stop crying, it kind of forces you to figure out what's going on, right?
And do you know what caused the crying?
Well, first of all, I had lost a family member in 2018 that I was really close to. You know, we had really built a really good bond. And in losing her, that woke me up. And I know we use that term so loosely, but that's exactly what it did. It reconnected me to who I have always been. I've always been sensitive. No matter what face I would put on, I was very sensitive as a kid. And that's probably why I responded to life the way that I did, is because I was sensitive. So it forced me to return to those feelings. And once I couldn't turn it off, I had to find a way to turn it off. And I didn't want to escape it because I've been escaping, and escapism in terms of avoiding it, drinking it away, you know, having sex to not feel it anymore, you know, working a lot. Those things used to just like, okay, I'll do with you later. And then later would never come until once the floodgates, you know, opened. I was like, okay, I'm going to sit in it and it's not going to feel good. And I'm going to be okay with that, because on the other side, and it's the self-talk, on the other side, it cannot get any worse than this. It just cannot get any worse than this. So it's sitting in it and you feel like you're going to die. I'm not even going to lie to you. You feel like you're going to die. Well, you don't die. You don't. I'm still here.
So this has really been such a great way to kick the series back off. It's such a good interview because these are all the things that I know you and I are both touching on in our own private practice all day, every day.
Yeah.
And so what I always say to my client is, you've always avoided this deep, dense, dark forest.
Yeah.
I've been through it about 50 times myself. When you get in there, it's pretty pitch black. And the first 25 times I went through it, I got so beat up and bruised until I took a flashlight with me.
Oh, man.
Then I learned the paths. Then I took about 150 people through and taught them the path. So what I do is I teach you to walk into that deep, dense forest. I'm going to tell you, look, this part of the path is going to suck.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to suck. You're going to get beat, bruised, scraped. You're going to bleed. You're going to sit here. You're going to cry. It's going to suck.
It is.
But I'm not going to leave your side. You're not by yourself. You don't have to go through it by yourself. Yes. And I can help you make sense of these feelings.
Yeah.
And then you're going to stand back up and we're going to walk a little bit more.
Because the truth is, the only way out of what you're feeling right now, the
True.
darkness, the brokenness, is through it. There's
Yeah.
no other way. If
And you
anybody
said
tells
it,
you
the sex,
otherwise,
the working, the drinking, the shopping, the whatever, it's all avoidance,
yeah, it is.
right?
It is.
So you have this breakdown to the breakthrough.
Yes.
And so you've explained to us, you start feeling the feelings, you're sitting in the feelings. It sucks. You think you're going to die.
Yeah.
What encourages you to stay in it?
Is when there was this glimmer of hope when I saw me. There's this picture that I always sometimes, I remember going through an exercise and they said, try to remember the moment that you were your happiest, where joy was just the epitome of you. And I saw that little girl again. That big smile, just her free spiritedness. If you are sitting here, you'll see that sign, free spirit. I've always been a free spirit, always. And when I saw that version of me, even for the slightest moment, I was like, oh, so that's what's on the other side? Oh, we're going to push through this. This is not going to defeat me. Yeah. So who you see today came from under all of that rubble.
Did you read anything or listen to anything through that process? Because I like to offer as many low cost and no cost resources to people that need to do this kind of work, but maybe aren't in a financial position to hire a coach or work with a therapist.
I think you mentioned it before. It's The 4 Agreements. I read that book back and front multiple times. Even every other month or every other year, I'd say I'll just jump in and just do a little refresher. But that book did it for me. Yeah. And Marissa Peer's Uncompromised Life on Mind Valley. I found that. And I was like, you know what? I may not have all the money in the world, but I'm like, wherever I can put my little 2 cents, I'm going to invest it. Because I'm not investing in someone else. I'm investing in myself. And for a long time, I've invested in everybody else. So it's time to invest in me. And I can safely say I'm closer and closer to my authentic self, because it's a journey. I mean, you're not going to just get up one day and you're going to be back to where you came from.
You were never healed. I always say to my clients, we can talk about the real ROI here.
Yes.
Okay, you're never healed. I am certified in God knows how many things. I'm still on my own journey.
Yeah.
I spent the entire summer crying, literally. I've never cried more in my life at the age of 50 than I did this summer. Because all this shit was coming up and I'm like, oh my God, there's so much more work to do. I thought I had done, and I did. I have done so much work on myself.
Yeah.
In and out of therapy since I was 15 years old. It's 35 years of work.
Yeah.
The difference is that you're always going to come up to something that's a trigger. Like you said, somebody turning their back to you, it's just the feeling comes right back up.
Yeah.
It's just that we identify it quicker. We're aware of what's happening. We take the tools out of our toolbox, we instill them, and we get out of it quicker.
Yeah, you don't stay there for too long.
It doesn't mean when you're doing this work, it doesn't mean you'll have peace for a lifetime.
No.
It just means that you know that peace is available to you and you know how to access it, because we're going to teach you how to access it.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't just stay because shit happens.
It sure does.
And you're going to get into situations where they're going to be really hard. You're going to get tested.
Yeah, you're going to feel like you want to die.
You're going to feel like you want to die.
Yeah, but you're not going to. I promise you, you're not.
So listen, you go through this whole experience. You end up going through the same training I went through, which was so fascinating to me. It's such good training with Marissa Peer. And you open your own coaching practice. So why don't we talk a little bit about that? I'm going to put, because right now we're streaming live. I want people to know the name of your practice is In Divine Time, but it's THYME. And the website is www.indivinetime.com.
Yes. That was story.
Tell us a little bit about that website and your coaching practice.
So first of all, the story behind the name is I honestly believe that nothing happens before its time. Nothing. Nothing that's supposed to happen won't not happen. Right. And for me, and I have to add this story. In going through my journey, there are scars, there are experiences that to the world is uncouth. It's not acceptable. And I remember I got pregnant in 2013. And I had already in my mind told myself, I'm not having kids. I would never have kids.
And how old were you at that time, Caurel?
It's so funny. My mom had me when she was 24. And I was 24 when I got pregnant. And I had already, like I said, had a belief that I am not having kids. Like that, I'm not going to try to relive my own childhood, have somebody else go through that. It was the pain that was talking. And I remember my partner and I at that time taking the pregnancy test, and it came out negative. And I threw the test away, walked away, went about my day, and something was screaming at me saying, you need to go check that test. I'm like, why? It's negative. So about a couple of hours went by, I would say about 2 or 3 o'clock. I checked the test again, and lo and behold, I'm pregnant.
Son of a bitch.
Yeah. Yeah. I could have just died in that moment. I remember calling on my family member in Florida, my cousin. I said to her, this is not going to happen. This is not going to happen. And
because what was your fear?
That I would turn into my mother. And my child would view me just the way that I viewed my mother. The pain that I experienced, that child would experience the very same pain. And I would never do that to another person. So I decided to terminate the pregnancy. And I look back at it and there's no shame. Like I can honestly say there's no shame because I feel like it's the universe that was just like, look, where you need to be, where you are going, where you want to be, what the achievements that you want, the purpose that you're here for, this cannot be a part of the story. It cannot. And I made that decision even without my partner. And I look back at it and maybe I should have had the conversation, but I knew in that moment that wasn't a part of my story.
Did you know in that moment there was work to be done, or were you not there yet?
That's a hard question to answer right now. But in sitting in my truth, no.
Yeah.
No.
But you just knew in your gut, no. I'm going to break the cycle.
Yeah.
But you didn't really know that also meant there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I share that story because a lot of people don't know that story. Like a handful of people know that.
I had a chill when you shared it. So I'm really grateful that you had the courage and the vulnerability to share it.
Yeah. You see, when you don't have shame attached to something, you're not going to hide it. You're going to just show up in it. You're going to show up in your strength and your power. Because I know that wasn't my story. Because if I'm going to break a cycle where I was at that point, no in hell could I bring a child into the world and break that cycle. In my mind.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah.
So you go through this training, you decide to start your own practice.
Yes.
What is unique about your practice? What kind of people do you like to work with in your practice?
That's a very interesting question. I attract a certain type of client.
I do too.
Yeah. And that's why, even though I had already positioned myself towards childhood trauma, it's more of dysfunction. It's more of unworthiness.
Yeah.
You know, your identity stolen when you go through sexual abuse, sexual violation. That is my story as a part of my story as well. So somehow I seem to be attracting people that remind me of my own stories, and we collaborate and we work towards healing each other. Yeah. And the intention.
I think this is the big, there's a lot of difference between coaching and therapy.
Yeah.
Right. The main difference is therapist's job is to diagnose and treat. Our job is to not diagnose. I'll never let my client think that they're broken or even feel broken.
Yeah.
You're not broken. Your body is reacting normally to a very abnormal circumstance. And there's a reason why. So I'd rather be a puzzle master.
Yeah.
Let's sit down
Investigator.
and let's drop the box out of the puzzle out of the box. It's upside down. There's no picture.
Yeah.
And we're just going to start to put the pieces together. And you're going to say, no, that one doesn't work that way. This is it. And together in a very client focused, peer based way, we're going to sit side by side and we're going to put the pieces back together.
Yeah.
It's a very, very different approach.
Absolutely.
So you tend to attract, the universe is going to bring to you the people that need you and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So you're bringing to you people who have maybe experienced sexual violation, sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you help guide them to getting back to themselves? Because you do shed pieces of yourselves when these experiences happen.
I don't think you just shed. I think you lose your entire identity, and I'm speaking from my experiences. You know yourself as this version one day. And after that event, you are now seen, or you now see yourself completely different. It went from, oh, I'm this free spirit, I can say what I want, people understand, to, oh, I'm just here for somebody else's gratification. My worth is in how you can use me. So those two people are completely different. I have power here, and here I'm disempowered. Like, I'm just existing here, and here I'm fulfilled. I'm living in purpose. I'm saying what needs to be said. So I'm silenced after that.
So how do you bridge that for them?
It's one, giving fresh perspective. Because as a child, you think it's your fault and you walk around with that shame. It's my fault, so I need to be punished for this. I need to protect myself from this, so you don't go out for things that you want.
And it's important for people to understand the reason why a child puts blame on themselves.
Yeah.
Is because a child, as you mentioned, especially 0 to 7, very egoistic.
Yes.
Has this understanding that you are the adult, I am the child, or you are older and I am the child. And inherently older means you know more and you also know better.
Yeah.
And so therefore, if this is happening, and I don't know at this point in my life that there's such a thing as people who make bad decisions.
Yeah.
If this is happening, then I must be deserving of it.
Yeah.
Because you know better.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And people, it's important for the listeners to understand that, because I too have worked with many sexual abuse survivors, much of what some of them happening as young as 18 months old, 2 years old, 4 years old.
Oh, yeah.
And they absolutely took the blame for it in their minds and walked with shame their entire lives.
Yeah.
Because they thought that they made that happen for themselves.
Yeah. And it's funny, shame can show up in someone being a version that is overcompensating. I have to show that I'm good. I have to show that I'm not broken. So I have to show up being this workaholic. I'm a G, I'm a star, I'm a and you're
perfectionist.
You're so disconnected, because if you sit and you feel that shame,
you'll die.
You're done. Yeah. You're done.
until you can work with somebody that can help you work through toxic shame.
Oh yeah. So those are the clients that somehow gravitate to me, because I can relate to it, and they can relate to it from my side as well. So I share parts of me in my sessions, because they need to know they're not alone.
That's the other big difference people need to understand about therapy and coaching, is we are encouraged as coaches to sit by side. It is peer based, and we are designed to share our stories when it's relevant.
Yes.
And when it allows us to further tune and connect with our clients. where that's really not encouraged. It's not even really allowed or discouraged from a general therapist, right?
Yeah.
So if someone's listening and they're looking for support on their journey, and maybe this podcast interview really spoke to you, and maybe you feel really connected to Caurel's story, you can go to her website. It's In Divine Time. It's THYME.com. Her Instagram is the same. It's at In Divine Time, THYME. And she always has great content there. You can reach out to her. I'm assuming you have a free consult call for people that are curious, right?
I do.
And I know that you mentioned the 4 agreements, but I always love to end the series or the segment with low and no cost resources. My job with this podcast is my goal. My mission is to really help break the stigma.
Yes.
And I know from my own personal seat in 2012, 2013, when I had my last true breakdown that led to a whole, decades long journey, I did not have the money for a coach. I did not have the money for a therapist. Where I live, it's very hard to find a therapist that takes insurance at this point. And I had to do the work myself to start. And I did it with podcasts. I did it with YouTube interviews. I did it with books. The book that changed my life, the one that shifted me and opened my eyes, was by Brene Brown. And it's called Daring Greatly.
Okay.
And it literally was exactly what I needed when I needed it. I saw everything through a different lens from that point on. So above and beyond the 4 agreements, is there a low cost or no cost resource that you would encourage your clients or anybody that's listening to just take a peek at?
Very good question. Nothing is coming to mind right now.
Okay. Do you have anybody you listen to on podcasts?
I do. I listen to Diary of a CEO.
Okay.
Diary of a CEO. I think a lot of people don't recognize that entrepreneurs, CEOs are still people.
Yeah, we're human.
Yeah, we're human. And when you hear some of their stories, the other day I was listening to Maisie Williams from Game of Thrones, Arya.
Yeah.
And I was just so compelled to sit through the whole thing yesterday, actually. And just to hear her story and just how she turned the pain that she was experiencing into what fuels her skill in acting. I was like, she felt like my people, because that's exactly what I did. That's exactly what you did.
Yeah. So you do have one. It's the Diary of the CEO.
There we go.
The diary. It may not seem like something that's, self-development or whatever, but it doesn't matter. It's whatever connects, and that connected with you. So the Diary of a CEO is a great resource. I'll put it in the comments. So as we round this out, we've hit the hour. If you've watched this and you want to drop comments below, please do so on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, where this is streaming live. And we will answer your questions.
Yes.
If you catch this on the replay, do the same thing. And then next year in 2023, this will actually be stripped out, made into a podcast, dropped into wherever you hear your podcasts. You can already go and listen to the 2020 series I did. If you just go to wherever you grab your podcast, you're going to search for Flip That Shit, and you will find an entire series called Strong as a Mother. So thank you so much for joining us. Caurel, it was an honor.
Absolutely.
It was so great to kick the series back off after the summer hiatus with this interview. We could have talked for hours.
I know.
And again, if you're looking for Caurel, it's Caurel Richards at indivinetime.com. Thanks, guys.